At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Candace Perry, who will speak to you about the Eisenhower connection in Lebanon County. So, Candace?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. If I'm too loud, let me know. There are times when I am too loud. I usually don't even need a microphone, but I thought I better use it today because of the size of the room. Well, I am here today to talk about this topic, but a little bit about me first. I am actually originally from Robesonia. I went to Conrad Weiser, and I'm very proud of that fact. My family actually settled in the Tulpehocken a bit later than the Eisenhowers, but still from the same, basically cut from the same cloth. That's what I always say. I attended Penn State and Duquesne for my graduate work, and I formerly served as curator of the Kentucky Derby Museum. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'll be glad to answer them. But now I'm at the wonderful Schwenkfelder Library and Heritage Center in Pennsburg, Montgomery County. I have some brochures and a handout of some postcards. If you haven't been, we'd love for you to visit. We're in an exciting time right now because we have been given the go-ahead to put an addition onto our existing building, and also we're bringing a barn onto the property that people will be able to visit. Yes, really. So it's a very exciting time for us. A lot of changes afoot, and we're very proud of the institution and the direction it's taken in the late 20th and 21st century. But today I am here to talk about something that I was sort of surprised to find out many people weren't too aware of, and that was the presence of the Eisenhower family in Lebanon County. And very specifically, the ancestors of President Eisenhower. It's a really fascinating tale with lots of twists and turns and unexpected things going on in the families. But I hope to cover what I can today. It's actually quite complicated because there isn't a lot of information, but I think you'll have a good sense of them by the time we're done here today. I also wanted to say, if you have any questions, if something's unclear during the talk, please feel free to raise your hand, or if you have any comments. I like to have a dialogue, so if you have any thoughts on anything, please let me know while we're going on. Okay, this is one thing that is very complex. And I just was talking to a gentleman outside the room who encountered this particular problem. There may be more iterations of the name than even this. I don't know how many of us Pennsylvania Germans actually have this problem. My family sort of did Kintzer, but not to this extent. So, of course, there's the best known spelling that we all know, the president's spelling. But then Eisenhower, you see that frequently in this area with the H-A-U-E-R. The Eisenhower, the next one appears in older records, often associated with the English spelling the name, like the census and things like that. Eisenhower, once again, the English spelling the name. Eisenhower, once again, with the H-O-W-E-R, the English spelling the name. Eisenhower with just the R on the end appears in the census, and then Iron Cutter, which is supposedly the literal translation of the name, which occurs frequently in the colonial records as a way of identifying these people. The Anglicization, you know. Okay. So here we are in the Eisenhower Homeland This is the closest I could find map-wise to the Holy Roman Empire as it stood at the time of the immigration of Nikolas Eisenhower, who was the colonial forebear in America of President Eisenhower. So here on the left, you see the map of the Holy Roman Empire in 1789. And what changed between the time of the immigration in 1741 to 1789, I think, was pretty minimal. So right here, let me see if I can find it. I always lose them. Okay, they're right in here. This would have been the area of immigration of the homeland of the Eisenhowers, right in there. So if you go, this is the Rhine, okay? You see that? That's the Rhine. So most of our ancestors, if you're Pennsylvania German, which I'm assuming you are because you're here, are probably more from this area. And my family, I believe, is from over here, I think. So they were a little bit further east than some of the rest of us. Okay, so here I have Hessen, which is the German state where they were from, and then more specifically this area, Starkenburg, which was the more regional name, and then they were from right in this area from a little tiny village. It's still a little tiny village called Weschnitz, which was on the Weschnitz River, which is a tributary of the Rhine. Okay, so here we have Hans Nikolas Eisenhower, spelled H-E-A-U-E-R, and then we see them here on the ship's list that was, of course, transcribed by Rupp in 30,000 names, Rupp's 30,000 names. So here we have Hans Nikolas Eisenhower with the A-U-E-R. His son, Peter, another Johann Eisenhower, one of the other sons, and of course these are the males 16 years and up. And then there was yet another son, Martin, who should have been on the list but apparently was ill, so he did not appear on that list. So he was born in 1691 in Weschnitz and Starkenburg in Hesse-Darmstadt, and died in, I don't know, that's I'm not sure, and I left it blank. His wife was named Anna Margrethe Strubel, and she was born 1707 to 1775 in Lorzebach. I'm sorry, my German isn't very good today. Nearby. She was very close by to Weschnitz. So here we are. This is a fairly modern day map of Bethel and the adjacent townships in present day Lebanon County. That splurby mess there of me trying to draw on things online on the computer is Fredericksburg, just to give you a sense of where they were. Okay, so here is the first document in America that shows the name of Nikolas Eisenhower. Of course, it's iron cutter, and not even with 2 T's, but 1 T. And this was a warrant from 1753 for this property of 160 acres in Bethel Township, Lancaster County, because it was part of Lancaster County at that time, and signed by the surveyor John Skull. He granted this property then to son Peter, who was already, when he immigrated, he was a grown man, in 1759. Now this was a warrant for a survey, so it was surveyed, but he never received the patent for it, so apparently money never changed hands for the property, which they say is an unusual because of the colonial Pennsylvania, and certainly out here on the frontier, which this was really the frontier at that time, this would not have been abnormal, from what I understand. I don't know. What's sort of interesting, there's no patent issued, nothing. But later, he sold it to his son, or transferred it to his son. I'm sorry, he transferred it to his son, who then sold it. So I don't know, and got actual cash money for it. So I'm not sure what that was all about. Okay, so here we have this, the blue is Fredericksburg, and I'm sorry this is so light. I know it's very hard to see. But I wanted to give you a sense of where Nikolas's property related to Fredericksburg, since that's a very good point of geographic point to relate it to. So that's Nikolas's land in red, and then below it is their neighbor John Snavely, a bunch of other Snaveleys, and that's another one of those names that has suffered a lot of indignities. Are there any Snaveleys here? Because nobody knew how to spell it, but that one was even more tricky, because I guess it was Schnabeli or Schnabely. whichever you want to say. It depends on whether you're being Italian or something. But of course, that's a name that we see not only out here in Lebanon and Berks, but we see it in Montgomery County with the Mennonites in Montgomery County. There were Snavely Mennonites. So Snavely, and then it later shows up as Snavely, the English who couldn't understand what they were saying. They should have tried to learn German, shouldn't they? Okay. So all the various and sundry family members living around that property there. So this is really interesting, and I just found this, so I was very glad I could add it into the presentation today. I found a little mention online that Nikolas had had some Indian troubles in 1756, and I thought, okay, that was the first time I read that. Well, lo and behold, from the Pennsylvania packet on August 12, 1756, we see that his house was burned during the French and Indian War, during the raids by the Indians. So he was another victim of those Indian raids. I don't think there was any loss of life, but certainly his house was burned. Don't know anything before that or after that, specifically relating to his home, but that's it. So the red dot, I'm just showing you for those who aren't familiar with the location of Fort Henry. That red dot indicates where Fort Henry was, they were overseeing all these scary things that were going on to the German settlers on the frontier there. And as you can see, it's right above 78, or maybe you can't see, between 78 and 81, not too far from Bethel. And Fredericksburg, of course, is here. And there's Bethel. Okay, now I'm pretty much reaching the end of what we know about Nikolas. There isn't a whole lot. Nikolas and Anna Margareta are both said to be buried in Wenrick Cemetery in Linglestown, Dauphin County. But I would find this very remarkable, as you will see as the story goes on, because they didn't move until 1779, and Anna Margareta died in 1775, allegedly, so they would have been carrying around her corpse for a little while, wouldn't they, if they took it all the way to Linglestown with them 4 years later. So I don't think that's true. I don't think it's necessarily true that Nikolas was still alive in 1779, because that would make him something like 88. So he could have been, because these fellas have notoriously long lives, as you will see, and were very active in terms of many things, including having children, into very great ages when it's very unexpected. So it's hard to say, but in terms of religious affiliation for these colonial generations, we really don't have much evidence other than some baptisms, which I'll show you shortly. But other than that, really very little evidence of what faith they were adhering to. Of course, during that time period, the Tulpehocken was kind of a wild and woolly place in terms of religion. The Lutherans certainly held sway mostly, but the Moravians were there. There was a lot of rumors that the early Eisenhowers could have been Mennonite, but I don't think that's true, but maybe. So we really don't know, and we don't know where they might have been buried if they were not buried at Linglestown, so it's a mystery. Okay, so here we have Peter Eisenhower in 1716. So you can see he was already 25 in 1741 when they came to Pennsylvania. Oh, and I should add, there's another apocryphal story that I haven't been able to pin down. So if anybody knows about the Eisenhowers and knows about this story, it would be helpful if you could tell me where the reference is, because I can't find it. It's about the ship that they came on, the European. I'm sorry, I should have brought this up earlier when we were back talking about the immigration. But the ship Europa that they came from Europe on supposedly ran aground off of Lewis, Delaware, and the captain and the first mate or cabin boy or somebody were actually killed somehow. I can't find any mention. I looked through the papers because I thought something that dramatic, it should show up in the newspapers of the period. I couldn't find anything. I even looked under the name of the captain, tried to find out who he was because he had a strange name. His name was at least strange to me. I think he was a Scotsman. His name was Lumsdane. I found some Lumsdanes who were sea captains, but couldn't find any mention that this one was killed involving a ship like that. So if anyone it has to be something more than just a story on the internet. If you know actually where they found this story, I would love to know. Okay, so here we are with Peter, 1716 to 1801. He was the second son of Nikolas and Anna Margareta. They had many children, by the way. That's another thing that distinguishes these Eisenhowers, is a large amount of children they had. So the fact that we have this information and it's not all jumbled up with the rest of them, and many of them stayed around here, so hence that's why you're going to have the name Eisenhower that is is obviously from one of these other children, because there weren't a lot of Eisenhower immigrants in the colonial period. Okay, so this is the first mention of Peter in the Bethel vicinity, and it is for the baptism of his son. It's recorded as Petrus, but it was Peter, of course, by John Casper Stover. This was not done in a church. It was probably done in a home, either their home or somebody else's home. So this is what I mean about Peter and his family. He had these 19 children by 3 wives, and according to his will, around the turn of the 19th century, most of those children did live to adulthood, or at least were still alive when Peter was writing the will. Some of them have moved to North Carolina. At least one of them was killed in Germantown. It says in 1777, but the date doesn't coincide with the Battle of Germantown, so I don't know what he was doing in Germantown and got killed. But he had these 19 children by the 3 wives, and his 3rd wife is the one that's of concern to us. But we'll get to that in a minute. So he had all these children who were adults by the time his younger children were born. They were really well into adulthood. Okay, so here we have John Snavely's property, and Peter Ironcutter is right adjacent where the red circle is. So here is the survey for John Snavely here, and then Peter Ironcutter here. I was trying to compare this stream here to other maps of Bethel, and to try to figure out where it was. And because I have no directionals on this, I can't tell exactly. I almost thought that might be, Fredericksburg is between 2 streams, lies between 2 streams. So I thought, well, that might be that, and maybe it's just the directional of it is confusing to me. I don't know. But I know that John Snavely owned property that took in part of Fredericksburg. So that could be, that Peter Ironcutter property could have been adjacent to his father's. I'm not sure, though. Hard to tell. And then here we have another little tempting piece of breadcrumb here that shows Peter Eisenhower on the tax list in Bethel in Lancaster County still in 1771. Okay, so in 1779, remember that Nikolas's farm had been transferred to Peter, and in 1779, Peter then sold Nikolas's farm in Bethel for 2,200 pounds, and then bought a farm in Lower Paxton, Dauphin County for $3,300 from Abraham Latshaw, which is a good Mennonite name. He was 63 years old. Now, I say that because he had decided for some reason, yes, sir?
Excuse me, say the transaction took place in 1779.
Yeah.
Dauphin County was created out of Lancaster County in 1785.
Okay.
So this is 6 years before that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I used it. I should have had Lancaster County, but you're absolutely right. It was later that the real Dauphin, but it's in the present day Dauphin County. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for clearing that up. You're right. Okay. So, why did he suddenly decide to move to Lower Paxton Township in 1779? Why? Why did he do that? I was thinking maybe he followed one of his grown sons. He had a grown son also that moved to Lower Paxton with him, and there were some other children that also moved along with him. Maybe that's why he did it. Maybe it had something to do with his wife, who at this time, the wife No, he hadn't married her yet. He was still on one of his other wives. But at some point, his wife, Anna Margareta Dissinger, who he, actually, no, she would have been by now. He would have married her by now. Maybe it had something to do with her. It's just a great mystery, but ties into the later movements of the Eisenhower family, and when the other members chose to do something very unusual later in life. It's really quite extraordinary. Okay, so that's Fredericksburg. And you know, what's interesting to me is that there were these little places of settlement up here, whereas when I look at maps of Montgomery County, where Pennsburg is located, there were no little settlements really, hardly at all. There might have been a few houses, but not as substantial as what was called Stumptown. That was Fredericksburg. It was earlier called Stumptown. It had a couple other names too. But here's Jonestown here, not too far, and here is Linglestown over here. And what you can see on this map, and I'm sorry it's hard to see here on the screen, but there are some very well-marked roads that go from Stumpstown through Jonestown, comes all the way down here, and then jogs up there to Linglestown. So it was an easy drive, I guess. It was if you had your Conestoga wagon. It was about 30 miles away. So, and as I said, the roads went right to those places. So, I don't know. I wish somebody would figure this out, or that there were papers somewhere that told us why he decided to do this in his 60s. Okay, so here we have the 1790 census for Dauphin County, or for Lower Paxton Township, and you see him there in Peter Eisenhower. That's Eisenhower, and he farmed that Lower Paxton property until 1795, then sold it to son John. Another problem with these Eisenhowers, and you all know this if you're of Pennsylvania German descent, is that use of the name Johannes, Johann or John, and then but actually using the middle name as your name. But in this case, some of them seem to do that. Some of these Eisenhowers seem to use their middle name, but some of them didn't, or were in the records were just called John, and it is a mess. Because there were so many of them, and they were all named John something. John Frederick, John Nicholas, John Peter. It's a mess. Okay, so now we're here with Frederick Eisenhower, who was the son of Peter and Anna Margaret Dissinger. He was the last child of Peter Eisenhower, the last one. He was born in 1794, which made Peter, he's somewhere in his late 70s. And with Anna Margareta, he had many children not just old Frederick, but many, many, many children. I think he had about 9 with her when he married her, and they all were from the 1770s into 1794. She, needless to say, was considerably younger. So he established a dynasty of some size. And he, of course, had these children, and some of them stayed here in Lebanon County, some of them went to Dauphin, and some, as I said, went to North Carolina. So there's a whole number of Eisenhower families that are descended from Peter that live in North Carolina. So, Frederick, 1794 to 1884, he was born in Linglestown because he was born after the strange move, and then died in Abilene, Kansas after the next strange move. He married Barbary Miller, who was of the Brethren in Christ faith group, religious group. And that is finally where these Eisenhower people become religious. They find religion through Barbary and her family. And they become Brethren in Christ, or River Brethren, which were plain people. They were very plain, conservative people that started out along the Susquehanna there. I didn't want to go too in-depth on them because it just seemed like a whole other subject to go down a hole. But her family was Brethren in Christ, so that is where finally they began to have some association with an established church. Okay, so here we are where they all finally end up is in Elizabethville in Dauphin County, and you can see it there. It is right above where the railroad went through, and many of the women, then the girls would become, who married into the Eisenhower family, would come from this area. Here we have V.J.F. Eisenhower. I'm not sure who that is. I want it to be Jacob Frederick Eisenhower, but I don't know what that V means. So, and this map is from the mid-1870s. So now I know we have to skip forward, but there's just so precious little information for over that century. It makes it very hard to put together a really coherent story. Okay, so here we have Jacob Frederick Eisenhower. If you go to Elizabethville today in Dauphin County, you will see his monument. Has anybody seen the monument? Have you? Okay, so here's the monument near the Eisenhower Homestead in Elizabethville in Dauphin County, and now it's being maintained by a family. I think a veterinarian who has taken very good care of it and cares very much about the history of the house and the family. So Jacob Frederick was born in Elizabethville, and he married Margaretta Rebecca Matter. And if you look back, there's a whole bunch of Matters here. So I'm sure she came from one of these families. One down here too. A whole bunch of them. And he, of course, was the president's grandfather. He became a pastor in the Brethren in Christ Church, and decided decided around 1878 to move to Abilene, Kansas, and picked up everything. And so he was, how old was he? 52, and he picked up everything and moved the family to Abilene, Kansas. Frederick went along, old Frederick, who lived with them, I guess, and plus this son, who was the president's father, and for whom, of course, David Eisenhower, who is still among us today here in Pennsylvania, he was named for the president's father. So he was born in 1863, so as a teenager he moved to Abilene with the family, and also met Ida Stover, who was born in Mount Sidney, Virginia, and she would have been the president's mother. So there we have it. They moved to Abilene in 1878 with this group from the Brethren in Christ, and the rest is, as they say, history, and that's pretty much the story. I know there's a lot of gaps there, but there is a lot of things we simply don't know. Probably if I was able to go to the Eisenhower Library, maybe some of it would be filled in, but we just simply don't know and don't have the information other than land records and tax records and censuses about what they were doing. During the 18th century, the 19th century, prior to the move to Abilene, Jacob did move around a bit. He was in Millersburg and Lingelstown area for a while farming, and then finally that's later ended up in Elizabethville and built that very nice house. Okay, so one last little thing here. This is one of the great mysteries of the family name. This is about Frederick Stumpf, who would have been the founder of Stumptown, which became Fredericksburg, and John Ironcutter, who I have not been able to determine, because he's named John, which one he is. So what they did, and I will read this to you, this proclamation by John Penn. Whereas a number of armed men unlawfully assembled did on Friday the 29th of January last forcibly enter the jail in Carlisle in Cumberland County, and in defiance of the laws rescue from thence the persons of Frederick Stumpf, oh my God, was that a Freudian slip? Wasn't his dad's name Frederick? Or boy. Okay, sorry, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Persons of Frederick Stumpf and John Ironcutter, who had been apprehended and committed there for the murder of 10 Indians on Middle Creek, and have since set them at liberty. And whereas the measures heretofore, for retaking the said Stumpf and Ironcutter have proved ineffectual, and there is reason to believe the murderers are either concealed within this province or have made their escape to some of the neighboring colonies. So Frederick Stumpf and John Ironcutter were accused of murdering these Native Americans, probably in retaliation for whatever was occurring in Bethel Township, of the raids in Bethel and adjacent places during this time period. The story is very sketchy, but obviously something happened because it was in the papers. It was seemed to be an important event, but which one this John Ironcutter is, cannot tell. It says he was born in Germany, and that does not add up for 1768 to any of Nikolas's sons. So I don't know if that's true. And it sounded like he is obviously a servant of Frederick Stumpf. Frederick Stumpf was a person of some means. Here's a description of Frederick. Born in Heidelberg Township, Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, of German parents. He is about 35 years of age, 5 feet 8 inches high, a stout, active fellow, and well-proportioned, of a brown complexion, thin visage, has small black eyes with a downcast look, and wears short black hair. He speaks the German language well and the English, but indifferently. He had on, when rescued, a light brown cloth coat, a blue greatcoat, an old hat, leather, breeches, blue leggings, and moccasins. So John Ironcutter, born in Germany, is about 19 years of age, 5 feet 6 inches high, a thick, clumsy fellow, round-shouldered, of a dark brown complexion, has a smooth, full face, gray eyes, wears short brown hair, and speaks very little English. He had on, when rescued, a blanket coat, an old felt hat, buckskin breeches, a pair of long trousers, and white yarn stockings and shoes with brass buckles. So, interestingly, Martin Eisenhower, who was the eldest son of Nikolas, okay, I know this is a little confusing. Martin Eisenhower, there are some apocryphal statements about him being killed by Native Americans. But they called him Martin. They did not call him John, and he was not 19 in 1768. He was already dead in 1768. So it doesn't seem to add up with him. They also talk about this John Ironcutter having moved to some far-off place and living like a hermit. He got away. They escaped. They didn't get caught again. But going to some place and becoming a hermit, and then possibly ending up in Virginia or North Carolina, which sort of goes along with some of those Eisenhowers that moved to North Carolina. But the dates and the fact he couldn't have been born in Germany unless he was of some Eisenhower that came from another family. But it just seems like too much of a coincidence, doesn't it? It seems like it to me. I feel like he fits in there somewhere. But he just after this little bunch of shenanigans, he disappears from the record. Frederick Stumpf doesn't. He's around for a bit, but this John does. Well, thank you. We got done fairly rapidly, but if you have any questions or any comments or corrections, I'm always glad to hear them. Anybody? Yeah.
In Lebanon County, in the Bethel Township, is there any homestead or a farm that the Eisenhowers?
There does not seem to be anything existing. There's nothing identified.
Yeah, they were at Linglestown, and there should be something there too. Maybe.
But there should be, but yeah, I am not real good at land records, but if somebody could identify where the property actually was, we could probably pin it down and see if there was anything there. But you're right, yeah.
So you don't really have any specific location. You said it was out near Fort Henry or something there.
Yeah, the Nikolas's property
Yeah.
would have been, it was sort of, if you remember that one screen where I had the blue outline of Fredericksburg and the red,
Yeah.
it was sort of to the north and west of Fredericksburg, his property. So, yeah, who know? I'm not familiar with that area, but if somebody is, they may be able to find something. Yes, sir.
I live about 2 miles away from where I think it's at.
Oh, really?
I've heard from someone, I work at Fort Indian Town Gap, and there's an old retired pilot who says he knows the family that owns part of the land that might have been a part of it.
Okay.
They give me the road and everything.
Okay. Very interesting. So there could be something. Now, remember, one of his the early house burned. So at least that's what we're told by the reports. But so does that make sense, though, where I'm
Yes,
saying
it
north
does.
and west of
Yeah,
Fredericksburg?
the road is called Sugar Road.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I live
Sugar-
in Camp Strauss, which is about 2 miles away.
Yeah, that's Sugar Road.
Okay.
So that's where I've been told it's about.
Great. No, thanks to confirming. Okay. And are there old buildings out there on that road? 18th century?
I don't think there's not a lot of old buildings still on Sugar Road.
No, most of the.
The farms are sold
From
off
looking
and they're
at-
like housing
Yeah,
development.
Okay.
looking at
Oh,
that
okay.
Now, most of it on Sugar Road, where I think the farm probably would have been, if it is the exact spot, is gonna be just pure farmland right now.
Okay.
There is a section,
There's a couple possibilities.
a couple possibilities, there's a
I was jotting
section,
down notes so we can do the
Okay.
research.
there's a section east, as you go west off of Sugar Road, out of Fredericksburg, there's a section in there that's still pure farmland that I don't think had anything on it.
Okay. Yeah, because when my memories, I don't go over there much. Sometimes I do and I should have gone in preparation for this. But my memories are there were lots of expanses of farmland and very little remaining old farms. I know that my immigrant ancestors, nothing exists of his farm.
Well, and they did put I-78.
True,
You know,
true,
right
true,
across
true.
Sugar, you know, right?
Yeah,
Bisects like
Yeah.
that, so it could have been I-78.
yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you both for
Yeah,
that.
I can try to find who I talked to that said they lived on the property. I don't know if they have information that they might have themselves. I can.
Yeah, and I have an email address
Okay,
too.
sure.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
In 1965, I had graduated from high school, kicking around. I got a job with a surveying company that was surveying for Route 78 from Route 81 down to the county line.
Okay.
And during that time, I became aware that there was an Eisenhower property. However, I was told by our crew chief, if you're in Jonestown, go almost straight north. And it wouldn't be quite as west as what they're talking about. There was an old yellow house sitting on the property along the road.
Okay.
And that was supposedly the Eisenhower property. Now, with so many kids,
Yeah, it could have been, it could have definitely been one of,
Right.
like an uncle's house or something that,
because back then, when you surveyed, if you took 1 inch of a property, you had to survey the entire property.
oh, okay.
So we had to, research all kinds of records. Today, you only have to survey what is actually being
Right,
affected.
right. Well, thank you, great. Anybody else have any thoughts? Thank you for that information, that was really helpful, and now we'll all be driving back there trying to find out what happened to Nikolas's farm, or
Well, we
Peter's,
also
it could be
have
Peter's.
Old timers from that area too, we can talk to them and see if
We
they
know
have
a lot of the
stories.
old timers, yeah.
Yeah.
in that
Because
area.
there is so little surviving information written down anywhere. People were very interested in Fredericksburg because it was so early and had such an early history of a real community being there, not just like a couple of houses and a church. And it was a real little settlement. So that's been of interest for forever to people and researchers. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And I have some brochures, et cetera, here.